My name is Dan Ruby. I'm the Associate Director, or excuse me, I'm sorry, the Executive Director of ScienceWorks Museum. And now a new title is CEO of ScienceWorks Labs, which is an offshoot of the museum. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But basically I run the place, and I've been doing that since, for almost exactly 2 years, since the end of June in 2018. I've loved it. Best couple years of my life so far. It's been a really fun adventure, and it's an honor to get to steer the place. So a lot of you might know more about this than I do, but I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm aware of, how we got to be where we're at from my now insider perspective, and then I'll tell you where we're going. So I'm familiar with the beginnings of the museum because I'm friends with John and Sharon Javna and Dave Bernard, who were instrumental in the museum. I've never met Dan Kranzler, part of the Curlin Foundation, but that's the other of the triad of families that helped bring a science museum to Southern Oregon. So before that, and again, you might know this more than I, from what I understand, in the mid-90s, there was a very ambitious natural history museum that was put in where we are now. I never got the opportunity to see that. I had friends that went to college in Southern Oregon in the mid and late 90s, but I never went to the museum here. So I don't know anything about that run, and it doesn't matter because it's not here anymore. But what they did leave us was a huge, beautiful building. And actually, let me back up a little bit more than that. I am aware that we are on a plot of land that is owned by SOU. We lease it for them for a very, very long time. And originally that was created as an environmental campus. That entire place that houses the forensics lab and the SOU farm and sustainability center. So we used to be all one campus with the intent of environmental education. I'm gonna put a pin in that because we're gonna come back to that later. So fast forward to the year 2000 is when Sharon primarily and John was helping kind of spearhead an effort to build a children's museum for Southern Oregon. They were from the Bay Area and loved Lawrence Hall of Science and the Exploratorium in San Francisco and Chabot in Oakland and all the amazing institutions in the Bay Area. Having moved here, they wanted to create something like that for their kids. So after 2 years of immense community effort, originally it was called the Southern Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, SI. I think they were really modeling after OMSI, but for Southern Oregon. In the middle, meeting in the middle school, planning in the middle school, building exhibits with a lot of volunteers from across the community, kind of grassroots built this amazing hands-on science museum. And I can tell you from my experience running the place and from experience in previous institutions, it's a very improbable place. So by all means, it really shouldn't exist. We are too small of a town in too rural of an area, and we shouldn't exist, but we do because a lot of people worked very hard to make it happen. That presents some challenges because it's an improbable place that makes it very difficult to figure out how to run because it's not like any other place. But that's also our biggest asset, is that we are not like any other place. We are a very weird institution in a very unique area, in a very unique region, and all those are huge, huge opportunities for us because I don't want to be a little exploratorium, and I don't want to be a little OMSI. I want to be the best in the world at what we do, and because we are this improbable museum in this amazing area, we can do that. So I was very excited to be selected for this job here. I came from the University of Nevada, Reno. I was there for 12 years before that, running the Planetarium and Science Center there. So it's an amazing place, amazing opportunity, and I was excited to lead the place starting 2 years ago. So 2000, it was started in the middle school across the street. It opened after 2 years of hard work and thousands of hours of volunteer contributions from the community in the building that we're at now. Originally, the building was leased, and in 2015, I believe, 14 or 15, before my time, but we were able to conduct a capital campaign and purchase the building. So the building is now ours, which is huge. That's something that's great to have your own building. We don't have to lease it. But between 2002, when the doors first opened, and now, it just built slowly as a science museum, steadily over years and years and years and years, growing audience, being open more hours, and hosting more field trips. So we've been pretty steady for the past few years that our annual attendance is around 50 or 60,000 people. Of those, anywhere from a quarter to a half, depending on season, are tourists. So we attract a different kind of tourist to the region than OSF does. So there's very little Venn diagram overlap of OSF's visitors and our visitors. We like being available for a resource for people that are staying here for multiple days, but who we generally attract is people that are up and down the I-5 corridor, young families on road trips from Portland and Seattle to the Bay Area or vice versa. And they are stopping for lunch basically, and then they're not going to get back in the car because they have a couple little kids, and so they're looking for other things to do, so they end up coming to the museum, staying for a couple hours, and then staying for dinner and staying overnight. So we know this about our survey of our tourist visitors, and I know that firsthand because that's how I found the museum. So I have a spouse and two boys that are now 10 and 14, but when they were 3 and 7, we were driving from Portland to Reno on a road trip down the I-5. We stopped for lunch in Ashland because it's the halfway point. We were looking for something else to do. We found the museum, fell in love with it, and spent a couple hours here, had to stay overnight. And I thought to myself, if I could do anything after what I do now, I'd love to be involved with that museum. So that was my experience, but it turns out that that's a lot of people's experience. So it's a unique tourist attraction. It's a distant second to Shakespeare, but it is one of the things that brings people to our region. So, and to Ashland specifically. So it built up to that, 50 to 60,000 visitors a year over those, now we've been around for 18 years. And we've also grown from a few hundred field trips a year to now we serve about 10,000 kids a year on school field trips. And all this, we'll talk about the COVID shift in a little bit. But that's about our capacity. We're really about at capacity at the museum. The people before me have done a fantastic job of gradually building this into a sustainable and healthy, surviving and thriving institution that serves a region that stretches coast to Cascades. 100 kilometers from the museum is really our service area. So we stretch down to Wairika, we stretch over to Crescent City, up to about Roseburg, and over to Klamath Falls. And we get field trips from all those. We get public visitors from all those places. Our members are from all those places. So it's been slow and steady growth, adding new exhibits over time. And a lot of that is with volunteer labor, community collaboration. And so the people before me built a great place. And I'm happy to answer any questions after this. I'm not sure. That's the short story of how we got to where we're at. And that's about what I know about where we got to where we're at. I'm sure I can answer some specific questions, but starting 2 years ago, I started there, and I was very excited about the potential for the place, knowing that it's a really improbable institution in a very unique area. It's a beautiful, beautiful area, means that there's an opportunity to do things that nobody else can do. And so it's been really exciting to try to figure out what that is. And so my first week on the job, I think, I sat down with Pam Marsh to kind of learn about what our area is like, and I learned a lot. She gave me a report from United Way, an ALICE report, access limited, income restricted, that basically the region as a whole is the bulk of the people in the region are above the poverty line but below sustainable, if that makes sense. Which is really interesting because that's it was interesting to get that report and realize that the core audience of who we are going to be serving and that who we serve as a museum are people that are not broke enough to be poor. So it's not, they're not having to make a decision between eating or going to the museum, but they also are not going to be donating lots of money because they don't have any spare income. So that was the first thing I did, was learn a little bit about demographics of a region. And then part of this, through talking to community partners, but also just living in the area, I learned very quickly that it is not a homogeneous rural area that stretches coast to Cascades. Southern Oregon is not, it's very hard to figure out what the identity of Southern Oregon is, because Ashland is very different than Talent, which is very different than Phoenix, which is very different than Medford, which is very different than Central Point, which is very different than White City, and so on. Every community is independent and has a very different character and very different demographics. And I learned this also when we first moved to Medford, and I would drive from Medford to Ashland every day, and people would say, "I can't believe you commute that far every day." And I was blown away because I'm used to driving a long time, and you know, a 1 hour commute would be not a huge deal. So the like 15 miles from door to door, having that be considered a long commute was funny to me and enlightening, and it is. I think it is now. I live in Ashland, and I dread driving to Medford because it feels like it's an hour away, and it's not. But that was something I learned really quickly, is that we have these kind of non-permeable membranes around each community, and we don't have a free flow of ions between the communities so much, culturally or in really many senses, economically. So trying to figure out what is the thread that holds all these together, and what is a thing that how can we follow that thread and serve the entire region? Because our mission is to be science for people of all ages and backgrounds for the region that we serve. And if it's such different communities, how do we do that? And what I figured out pretty quickly is that, and I could be wrong about this, but this is my kind of secret sauce for the museum, is that the thread that binds us all together is that we are all very forward thinking in a way where we don't mind getting dirt under our fingernails. So it's not necessarily high tech. It's not like Bay Area high tech 3D printing, robotics stuff. The innovation that's happening in this region is not necessarily agricultural, but it's a really DIY, community focused, across all politics and economics. Yeah, forward thinking, but by doing, getting your hands dirty. And so that kind of idea of innovation that doesn't have to be high tech, it can be low tech innovation. But that idea of that's the thing that everybody has in common in the region is one of the things that I really want to focus on and showcase at the museum. I would really love for the museum to be a showcase for all the neat things that we're doing in the region that people don't do other places. And so for me, that was the kind of flavor that ties us together. So it took me weeks and months to figure that out. When I first started, we were in the middle of a strategic planning process and with Paul Nicholson, and that was great. We wrapped that up in my first few weeks. It was a whirlwind, and then we did a master plan. We have a new mission, vision, and values. In the first year, we were just busy kind of thinking about where we were, taking stock of where we were and where we wanted to be. And so what we came up with is that we don't want to be thought of as the Ashland Children's Museum. And I'm glad that that's not in our name. We are not called the Ashland Children's Museum. We're called the Hands-On Science Museum. That's great. But I think that was kind of a community perception for a long time. I want to make sure that we are really thought of as a community resource for science for people of all ages and backgrounds. For me, that's a very personal mission, because I believe that people tend to stop paying attention to science at the end of their school careers. And that can be 8th grade or 12th grade or undergrad or even grad school, or even people with PhDs. Their knowledge of science stops when they stop learning about it. And the unfortunate thing with that is that science is inherently human pursuit. Everybody makes art and does science. In your daily life, you are exploring things, questioning things, learning new things, observing things. We just do that as human beings. It's an inherently human pursuit, and we don't have an opportunity to practice it if we don't have an opportunity to practice it. A lot of times we're not sharpening that skill set, and it's a skill set that serves us our entire lives. But the other thing is that science, the other reason that's unfortunate to me is that science is continually changing. It's very dynamic and exciting. And when I worked at the planetarium, my favorite example of this was I would ask students how many moons Jupiter has. And they would know more than I would. I would learn from them how many moons Jupiter has now. You might remember Jupiter having 16 moons. It doesn't. We're up to like 60 something moons for Jupiter now. I don't know, I don't keep track because we find new ones all the time, but science is always changing. We learn new stuff all the time. And so having an idea of science frozen to a certain point in time does a disservice to all of us, to our entire society, if we have citizens that are not continually engaged in the really fun kind of story of science. So my first thing was I really want to make sure that we start to craft the museum as a resource for people of all ages and backgrounds in the region that we serve, and really as a fun public face for science. We also know, it's in our name, that the best way to do science is by doing it, not playing at it. I've worked with students for many years. What you want is students actually doing science, not pretending to do science. And so we think that hands-on inquiry, where you're learning new things, is the way to do it. So I love that that's in the museum. That works for all ages. It doesn't just work for kids. Adults learn better by doing science than by just reading about it. So that's core to us. And then the other thing that we're adding is adopting the framework for next generation science education to the museum. So this was something that a coalition of states have worked on for a couple decades, has been adopted by most states as the next generation science standards. But the framework for next generation science is a way to understand the ongoing narratives of science as intertwined, braided threads of physical science, earth science, natural science, life science, and technology, engineering, arts, and math that are supporting things for sciences. It turns out that works for all ages, not just for kids in elementary school. So we've adopted that as kind of our framework, and we've just been going gangbusters for the past 2 years. Designing and building new exhibits, putting them on the floor as often as we have them, new field trip programs. The past couple years have been really fantastic at the museum, and I really enjoyed it. So that's the shift that happened when I started. There's some new things I guess I should probably talk about in the past 2 years. We've always designed and built our own exhibits. I don't know if you folks know that. One of the reasons I took the job is that we have a shop at the museum. Most museums let go of their shops in the mid-2000s. In 2008, we had a Great Recession. Everybody was hit across all sectors. Museums were hit especially hard. And the first thing to go, if you're a museum, is your shop, because it feels like you don't need to make your own exhibits. You can get them from other people. And so a lot of places ditch their shops. We did not. And I'm really glad about that, because that's a way for us to not only make products for ourselves, but it can be a revenue generator. And so we've always done that. We design and build exhibits for science museums around the country and around the globe. So we recently sent a couple to Australia that we built earlier this year. And we design and build exhibits. It's a lot of people don't know that we take money from outside of the Rogue Valley and put it into the Rogue Valley, because we buy local and build local and employ a healthy team in our shop. But that was something that was really fascinating to me, because that's a fun place to be. And it also is a way to be an effective museum and a tool that we have to do things that nobody else can do. So I was very excited that we have a shop, and we have an inventory of a bunch of exhibits that we lease around the country. They tour around the country, but have been a little bit dormant for a while. So I wanted to kickstart that. And so we thought about how to do that. We, right before I started, the last major thing we had done was a pterosaurs exhibit. And if you saw that, it was gorgeous, built by our shop, gorgeous woodwork, really cutting edge stuff about pterosaurs, which were not dinosaurs. They were cousins of dinosaurs. Totally awesome exhibit. That tours around the country starting in January with Turtle Bay and Reading. And so those kind of exhibits we can design and build, and that was exciting. So that's part of our new strategy, is designing and building our own exhibits really in earnest. In January of this year, we kickstarted a new initiative called ScienceWorks Labs. We got funding, significant funding from the Murdoch Foundation in Washington to launch this initiative called ScienceWorks Labs. So it's taking our exhibits business, as it were, and expanding it, and inventing a lot of new products for other institutional customers, but also for consumers and for schools. So just really thinking of new innovative things for museum markets or for science learners, and developing them here and selling them outside of the area. So we started that. There's a lot of fun things that we're working on with that. That's been a really fun way to engage talented people in our community. People come out of the woodwork. We have a very talented region. And so it's been fun to kind of tap into that brain power with the lab stuff. I can talk more about that, but basically it's taking the exhibits and blowing it up and making it way bigger and stronger and more intertwined with with curriculum and with public programs and with products and with exhibits. So kind of wrapping everything up together. The first major thing that we're working on for that is called Forest for the Trees. And it's about, it's the story of climate change told through the forests that we have in our region, in our neighborhood. Because we see and feel that here. We take climate change as a given. We are not up for debating that. What we are up for talking about is how that impacts people, how you can observe it, and what different paths we can take to address and mitigate that in the future. So that's something I'm very proud of. We'll be rolling that over the next year to 2 years. We'll see. COVID has kind of disrupted our schedule for that a little bit. But that was one of the things, is we have an exhibit shop. That's exciting. We're going to do more of that. We are also going to be doing different stuff with field trips. So the way field trips used to work for the museum is people would bus here if they were within 2 hours away on a bus, and they would spend 2 hours at the museum, and that's it. And that's a fantastic thing, because that is a type of field experience for science. But we want to work more closely with schools and have programs where we go to them and we're aware of what their curriculum is and where they're at in their unit. And then we provide a field experience and we provide some follow-up. So a much deeper experience than just a bunch of kids for 2 hours. The challenge there is that I came from a district of 66,000 kids that was stretched across the entire northern part of Nevada to a place where we have 22 districts and 14 counties that we serve. Every district has a different administration, different curriculum, different culture. And so it's been really fun to think about how we can't make them all fit our mold. So what we have to do is be really flexible and fit their containers. And so that's been really fun to do. We've been thinking of really specific solutions for really specific districts. And we have things like for Medford, every third grader from Medford comes to the museum on a field trip. And then we visit every fourth grader in their classrooms in Medford. That's really fun. For next year, we're going to be doing some really cool stuff. Nobody knows what's going on in school exactly, but we'll be ready with to serve the needs of a hybrid model where you're in school for some of the time and at home some of the time, or we can be a site for people to do learning at. We've been submitting grants for these huge fun projects with a lot of partners to be able to serve the changing needs of students over the next few years with science education. This is a side note, but something that happened a few years ago is that the shift in education has really headed toward sharpening language and math skills. And I don't disagree with that. That is awesome. But the amount of time spent in the classroom has gotten less and less and less for science and for art. To the point now that for a normal classroom in the elementary school, they spend maybe 1 hour a week on science. And that's hard for me because we have this set of science standards that we've adopted even as a state, and we don't have enough time in the classroom day to do the things that we want to do, which means that doing that whole picture of science, we have a big job there. We have some big shoes to fill, and we can do that. So we like to think of what can we do to augment what's done in the classroom to help give districts this kind of broad picture of science that they need to do, that we want to do as a society. So that's new stuff that we've been doing, is new field trip stuff, new education programs. We've been doing new camps. So we've always done summer camps. We are doing summer camps right now. We are open for summer camps. They are different. We limited the number of kids. They're spaced. It's very interesting. But summer camps we've always done, and we're moving toward developing our own proprietary summer camps. They're really fun. We have insanely creative people at the museum. A lot of people come from arts backgrounds. It's Ashland, so that makes sense. There's people from theater backgrounds, there's people from other performing arts backgrounds. Everybody seems to be a musician there or visual artist, but we have a very creative team and very creative area. So I want to make sure that we are developing our own proprietary camps that are unlike anything that anybody else does. We're doing that. So last year we piloted, and this year we have fun camps like Frankenstein Camp, where you learn a lot about, it's not only like an anatomy camp, biology camp, but you get to make monsters. We get to get really fun about literature and science crossovers. We had a zombie camp last year that was about pandemics, eerily enough. So it was about how to stop the spread of pandemics. We're debating whether we want to run that one this year or not. We had decided that we didn't want to run that one this year because it's kind of too timely, but also maybe it's timely. So we're still having that discussion. But those are the kind of things that we want to do for camps. And for public programs, we want to do stuff more for all ages. So we've always had our adult fundraising events. We have the Science of Wine thing in spring normally. We have the Brews and Boogie thing in fall. But we want to do more regular programming for adults, more stuff off-site with partners, and then more stuff for people of all ages when you come to the museum just during the day or on a weekend, that we have not just kid-oriented things, but stuff that's relevant and intriguing for all of our visitors. Here's an example. Last year, we opened up a new exhibit that we actually had purchased from the Science Museum in Minnesota called Wild Music. We got to make it our own. But Wild Music was great. It was about the science of sound and music and kind of the interaction between humans and the natural world through sound and music. And we got a lot of people that brought their grandkids and then asked if they were allowed to come back without their grandkids. And that was mind-blowing to me because of course you can. But it was interesting to think about, yes, these are things that we want to do, is more sophisticated stuff that takes a longer attention span. And so we're aiming that direction. So that's kind of the future. Oh, and we came up with this new master plan. So the building is awesome, but like any building that you inherit that you didn't build for yourself, it's interesting to figure out how to make it our own. And so we didn't make any of the choices for how to build it out. We've just been living with that. But we're thinking about how would we want to make our dream museum based off what we have now. And we worked with a really talented architect named Christopher Brown that's done a bunch of fun projects around, is continuing to do fun projects. And they do exciting things like they did the Crater Works project in Central Point to get really creative about what does our dream ScienceWorks look like, given the building that we have now. And what we came up with is a master plan that is beautiful and pretty much keeps the footprint of the museum. We want to build out only a little bit, but we really want to focus on thinking of the museum as 3 acres of museum instead of 18,000 square feet of museum. So we have those gorgeous grounds, potentially gorgeous grounds. We really like the idea of outdoor hands-on science. We are next to the SOU farm and sustainability center. We're across the street from the forensics lab. We're surrounded by 4 schools, 3 elementary schools and 1 middle school. Walking distance to SOU and the high school. We're really well situated to be more than just a museum building, but actually kind of a whole campus. And so we've got this master plan. We've been talking to SOU about really thinking about the entire area again as a cohesive campus. So working very closely with the schools that we are surrounded by and working closely with the forensics lab, where they're doing cutting edge science. If you ever get a chance to that place, I highly recommend it. It is amazing, amazing, amazing. And we have the SIU Farm and Sustainability Center that are thinking in really neat new directions. So with our master plan, it was the first start of thinking about our spot as kind of a new nexus for the city of Ashland, for the region, for sustainable innovation. So we want to be a showcase for sustainable innovation, and we are already a place where there are community events. We've got Siskiyou Challenge, we've got Earth Day, we've got our own events there, but we are going to be working with the Rogue Valley Growers Market in the near future to build out some of our master plan to make a community expo space or public expo space on the grounds. We'll be working with other partners in SOU in the future to think about that as a cohesive campus for sustainable innovation, where we're keeping and developing our outdoor spaces as living classrooms. I was very glad. I found an old shelved master plan in a drawer at ScienceWorks that had all of our grounds replaced by parking lot and buildings. And I am so, so glad that we didn't do that, because you can't really go back on that. So that's our plan for master plan. So I think I've covered what the vision is, covered education, covered exhibits, and covered master plan. So again, happy to answer any questions about any of this. We were rolling right along fantastically until March of this year when COVID hit. And I feel like, so people saw this coming for a few months, at least. Anybody that was paying attention saw this coming for a few months, or potentially coming. And I was as prepared as anybody could be. In my old job, I wrote our avian flu pandemic plan as an exercise for first thing. Here you go, your first assignment is write a pandemic plan for in case we get avian flu. So I knew a little bit, but this one's still different and it's unprecedented. So everything changed. So in March, we had to think about how do we operate as a different institution because we were not allowed to be open to the public. So I'm liking to think of all of this as an opportunity and not a stumbling block. Partially that's just a way to stay sane, but also it's true that all this is a great opportunity. So we closed our doors to the public on March 16th. We retained our staff thanks to some grants that we had and federal funding. And we kind of shifted gears to knock out the stuff of our master plan and strategic plan that we can do really easily. We were given a gift of a museum closed to the public for 3 months. We didn't have to deal with people bugging us at the front desk. We didn't have to deal with keeping things, we didn't have to deal with anything, but people could work from home, they could work from home, or we could isolate people in spaces and we can do facilities work. It's the first time that museum has ever gotten 3 months to just do what we want. And so we spent a lot of time refreshing the space. Now, if you haven't been back since we've reopened, which I'm assuming that you haven't, very few people have, which is fine. It looks very different in there. So we refreshed the space, modernized it, brought it aligned to our vision of being an all-ages science center and away from a children's museum. We got a chance to rethink what it means to be hands-on, which we can't be during COVID, but think about interaction without touching. And we're doing that by being kind of programming heavy. So it gave us 3 months to invent new stuff and to refresh the museum. So we've been hard at work. We launched an online program that was used by schools when schools were still in session. It gave us time to rethink camps, to think about what we could possibly do next year, and to really fix a lot of the invisible stuff in the museum. So we've kind of overhauled all of the systems and software platforms and tech of the museum. And we have cleaned everything, refreshed our spaces, redone a lot of floors. It's been fantastic. So the space is beautiful now. We called it the lemonade ops because we were taking lemons and turning them to lemonade. That was better. That was my associate director's idea. I just wanted to call it COVID ops. And she said, that's too depressing for people. Let's call it lemonade. So we've been doing that for the past few months. And on June 15th, we reopened our doors to the public. It's super exciting, and it's interesting because we don't want a lot of people there. Honestly, we don't, because we are learning more about the virus every day. Now we're a few months into this virus. We're more than half a year into this virus, or 8 or 9 months into knowing about this virus. We learn new stuff all the time. We kind of have a little bit of a handle on it now, and we know that the thing is you just don't want to be indoors close to other people. That's the thing. So we are a big, voluminous museum. I feel very confident that we're safe there, but we've really limited the number of people that can be in the building. Only 60 people can be in that entire building at once. Everybody has to have a mask. Everything is spaced out. We've taken everything off that's really touchy in the museum. So it's a very different experience. We've gone very programming heavy, and we are not depending on big summer crowds to keep us afloat right now. That's not going to happen. So normally during the summer, we get 300 people a day. Right now, we're getting 20 people a day. And that is fantastic because that's what that's safe. And we can handle that. But it makes us think about how do we modify what we do to not only survive and thrive, but continue to do so for the next few months. So we are no longer looking at the optimistic thing. I mean, do you remember when the governor first said people are going to be closed for a month, right? It was from early March to mid-April, and we knew better. We were planning through summer, and now we know that phase 3 reopening is not going to happen until there's a bunch of things, including reliable treatment and or a vaccine, and those are not going to be happening immediately. So we're in this for a little while. So it's a chance for us to play and experiment and learn how we operate in this new world. And that's fun. That's fun for our staff. We were really engaged staff. We were able to retain everybody on staff and just kind of give them new roles. One of the great things was we learned everybody has secret talents. We had a couple professional video gamers on staff that when we needed to go online, they've got a skill set to do that. So everybody's been able to be very, very flexible, and it's been super fun. We don't know exactly where we're going, but we do know that we are going to be finally bringing some of our really fun proprietary things to market. We have this board of science advisors, and they're brilliant, and they think of new stuff all the time. They think of robot kits or telescope kits or science kits. And so we've hired a contractor to help us bring those to market. We're going to continue to do our online programs. If you haven't seen them, you can find them on our website. We have a whole plethora at scienceworksmuseum.org of online activities, pre-recorded programs, live streaming content, and games that we've invented, simulations that we've invented. Our website has been the way to stay connected with us online. We're going to keep developing that for public audiences, but we're very excited to fill new opportunities for schools. So again, we don't know what's going to happen, but we're trying to plan for anything we can possibly think of. And one of those likely things is that students will be in cohorts that are on site for a couple days a week, at the school site for a couple days a week. And that means there's a few other days a week where they're not going to be on site. Maybe they don't have very much to do. They'll have their morning things of online stuff that they're supposed to do. But we want to fill that gap by providing activities in the afternoon. So basically continuing our camps as an opt-in augmentation to formal school, whatever it looks like next year. So we want to be a place where we can continue to do hands-on science inquiry for the schools that surround us. And I'm excited about that. That's a chance for us to try out new stuff that we're inventing. We also are looking for, we've submitted a lot of proposals to do fun stuff with offsite, which is great. We've always wanted to get outside of the walls of the museum anyways, and we do school visits, but this is a chance to really force us to do school visits. Schools will not be coming to us for field trips anytime soon. That science need still exists. It's probably more than ever. We need stuff for kids to do always. And so we're looking at ways that we address those needs in communities that are hard to get to and that may or may not have broadband access. A lot of our board members don't even have broadband internet access because they live up on Mount Ashland or near Mount Ashland. So we can't assume that everybody can Zoom like we are right now. We can't assume that students can do that. Maybe there's only one computer in the house and there's a bunch of students. Maybe they don't have a computer in the house. Maybe they're in an inaccessible place that doesn't have reliable broadband internet. So we want to serve everybody. And so we're thinking about ways to work with Southern Oregon Education Services District to take materials, kits, and activities through their courier service directly to families and community centers to serve these and schools that are having these cohorts of students. And then sending our staff to go do the hands-on part. So instead of them coming to us, we go to them. So that's a direction that we're taking. And I'm super, super excited about that. I know I said the word excited a bunch, but the COVID stuff is really awful on a global scale. Has been interesting because it's all of a sudden I had a new job. My job is no longer running a science museum. My job is figuring out how to run a science museum during a pandemic. And I love challenges. So that's a totally different job. I didn't expect to have that job last year, but that's the job I have. And now the job is, how do you sustain the operation of a science museum during a pandemic that is not going away? And we're seeing spikes of that in Oregon. Thankfully, not so much in Ashland. We are in Jackson County. But that's what we're working on right at this moment and for the next few months is how do we continue to survive and thrive, and so that we can serve the region with public science education institutions.